Ladies and gentlemen, please stand by. The conference is about to begin. Good day, everyone, and welcome to the CCC Recruitment and Retention Conference Call. Today's conference is being recorded. At this time, I would like to turn the conference over to Liz Guthrie, Training Coordinator. Please go ahead, Liz.
Thanks very much, Cynthia. All right, everybody, welcome to today's Recruitment and Retention Seminar. I am Liz Guthrie, the Clinical Coordinating Center Training Coordinator, and I will be moderating today's session. If at any time you experience technical difficulties, please go ahead and press *1, and a tech person will get on the line and help you out privately. So this is a 2-hour training course that will provide the beginning of recruitment and retention tools and some suggestions for troubleshooting. It's our hope that this seminar will enable your recruitment and retention efforts, and we hope that this will provide the foundation for discussion among your clinic staff. And feel free at any time to ask questions or provide your comments. You can ask questions by pressing *1, and let's see. I had Rania is on the line. I would like to ask Rania if she would mind pressing *1. Jen Potter suggested I could pick on you to show everybody how you ask a question. So Rania, would you mind pressing *1 and going ahead and asking Jen a question? Perhaps you can thank her for this.
And we will take a question from Rania. Please go ahead. Rania, your line is open.
Rami, all you have to do is say, "Thanks a lot, Jennifer Potter."
If you are on a speakerphone, please check your mute button, or you can pick up your handset. Ramya, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
There you go.
All right, Rania, thanks very much for providing us with an example for the group. All right, Jen, I'm done with the introductions. Again, please feel free to press *1 to ask your questions and to feel free to provide comments or input or experiences that you might be able to share with the group. Jen, I'll go ahead and turn the podium over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Liz.
You're welcome.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm Jennifer Potter. I can see from the list of people on the call that I know many of you. I certainly don't know everyone, but it's great to have such terrific attendance for this. One of the things that Lynn, Kunkel, and I want to emphasize is that with the 2 hours that we have, we could probably spend a week, and certainly trainings have spent several days talking about these two topics. And one of the things we hope is that with the varied experiences that people have, they can use this information in different ways. For someone who's really a seasoned recruiter or has a lot of experience with retention, they may use this information differently and use it to stimulate discussions and refocus perhaps on their recruitment and retention activities and perhaps get some new ideas. And then for people who are relatively new to recruitment, and I know there are several of you on, at least from my note I can say that, this is a chance to sort of get that initial primer and start to think about this because it's a very important issue in studies. As you'll hear us say a lot, or what I think is that recruitment and retention are really the liquid gold of a study. And you can often measure success of a trial about whether recruitment went on schedule and whether retention was retained. And that's not just a numbers game. It's really more than that. So because we have so much different backgrounds and experience, what we wanted to do is we're using our technology here, throw up a little poll and take a look at what types of experiences people have and at the extent of it. So Liz, I'm going to ask you to throw this up, or do I need to do that?
Oh. I can throw that up for you.
Thank you.
I think I can.
Hang on. Oh, yeah.
No, I think we lost that one. Which is your favorite of recruitment and retention?
Oh, here's the experience poll. We got it.
Okay. You have it?
I can see it, but do I need to bear with us. I can talk about recruitment and retention, but apparently I can't open a poll.
You go ahead and talk. I'll try to figure out what's going on with the slide.
Oh, my goodness. We're jumping all over.
There we go. Are you back?
I'm back.
All right. Sorry, everybody.
So just in terms of while we're figuring out the experience poll, and Cynthia may want to jump on and tell me how to get that open, what we're going to cover today is two sections. Something very strange happened because now we're on retention, Liz.
Yeah.
Okay, hang on. I think it's me.
You're on recruitment now?
Yeah, but I'm not doing it.
I'm not touching anything.
All right, Jen, I'm going to make you the presenter, and I'm going to go ahead and lock control over the display. You are completely in charge. Go ahead. We got that?
Yeah, no, I'm...
All right. So let me go ahead and take the control back.
Yeah.
All right. We apparently lost the presenter,
Okay.
the experienced one. So we'll go ahead and...
Yeah, we'll just move forward. I would be curious to know... okay. Well, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to get that sense of experience. It sounds like we've got people that have, multiple years of experience. And again, I apologize. I'm just looking at the names and the folks that I know, as well as people that have started within the last few months to really think about becoming recruiters or retainers of people in studies. Maybe what we could do is throw up that preference poll and take a look at that.
All righty.
So what we'd like to do now is have everyone answer this question. You just go ahead and click on it. This is, which is your favorite recruitment or retention? Do people clearly understand this?
Yeah.
We don't know who you are. It is okay to say neither.
All right. It looks like we got people that they have a pretty equal preference. Okay.
So everyone can see this, that it's so what we have is 20%, their favorite part is recruitment, 25% retention. Both is, I'm very happy to see, is 33%. Don't know is 4%. Not part of my job is 12%, and neither is 4%. So I think one of the things I take away from that is I'm really glad to see that people like both. It also sounds like a lot of people are doing both jobs because they do sort of go hand in hand. So I'm going to move back to my recruitment slides. Okay. Okay. So what we're going to go through in terms of... I am so sorry, this keeps jumping on my screen. Okay. So what we'll do in Lesson 1 of this section is go through the importance of recruitment. We'll follow that with building the foundation, adopting a systems-level approach to recruitment, and then developing a recruitment plan. And Lynn and I are going to toggle back and forth in these various sections. So, when we started thinking about doing this, one of the things that we thought was important is thinking about forests and trees. Because often in recruitment, what happens, particularly if you're the one working day-to-day in the trenches, it's very easy and it's a natural tendency to really just focus on those numbers. And that's because you have the lead node asking you every week, how many people did you randomize, how many people have you recruited, how many people have you screened, you've got your project coordinator or your site PI or your lead node staff or NIDA asking those same questions, and sometimes it starts to feel like that's the only thing you're doing. And it's really important to think about the forests that those recruitment numbers are in, because recruitment is really critical to the trials that we do. And I think when we lose sight of that, it starts to become, it can become a little bit more of drudgery of just trying to crank numbers through a trial. Recruitment is essential for a lot of reasons, and these are just some that we threw up on here. It's really about why we do what we do, and clinical trials are essential to the development of evidence-based practices, of new drug innovations, of new behavioral interventions. And because the clinical trial model is so important in how we develop our foundation of evidence-based practice, we need to be able to get the subjects into studies, because if we can't answer the question, if we can't get people into our trials, we can't answer the questions that we want to answer, and our field doesn't move forward. And so from the time when you see a clinical trial report republished, if you back that out, it all really started in many ways with the data collection, with recruitment. And I can't emphasize enough that it's important to see yourself in the context of a very large system of innovation in this research world that we do, so that we can bring new treatments. it's really critical to the success of clinical trials. The other thing that's important is that doing recruitment well also ensures that we get the representation we want in our trials. If we want to have a good representation of women in trials, if we want to have a good representation of minorities in trials, then we need to really not just get the numbers, we need to think about how we're getting those numbers and how we're accessing the populations that we want within a trial. It also means that if we can't recruit effectively, then we're not going to be able to answer the important research questions that we want to be able to answer. And so, I hope that all of that makes sense. I'm sure there's some other things that people have that they could throw up, but those are the things that really stand out for me is really thinking about where we're coming from this. So the bottom line really is that it's more than just hitting numbers. And if you've never actually read a clinical trial report, I really encourage you to do that. One of the things you can do is go to the CTN dissemination library, and your ROTC personnel or people at your community treatment program would have the website for that. Go to the CTN dissemination library. Take a look at some of the really important clinical trials that have been published. And remember, when you look at the numbers in it, read the methods and understand that it started with recruitment. And it started with being able to get people in trials. And for me, as a researcher who was an RA for many years before I got my PhD, that was what was so exciting to me, was I was part of this process that was able to answer important scientific questions. And every day that I recruited somebody and every day that I screened somebody, I was a part of that system of trying to improve healthcare. And I hope I don't sound too grandiose in that, but I really do think it's important for us to truly value the work that we're doing. And that's how this fits into that project. I just got some feedback that I was talking quickly, so I apologize, and I will try and slow down. I'm a fast talker. So please, if anyone has a problem with my speed, please let the operator know, and I will try and slow down. So let's keep going. One of the things that we can do when we think about recruitment is then we have to start thinking about how we're going to actually build a system. So what we want to do now is go from this broad sense of why it is and why we do all that we do, and really start to nail down how you actually go about developing a recruitment plan, how you go about monitoring your recruitment plan and being successful in the goals. So I'm going to hand it off to Lynn now.
Thanks. Hi. Let's go to the next slide. Is that my... Oh, I do have control. Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Lynn Kunkel from the Oregon-Hawaii node. One of the important things to do when you're thinking about implementing a protocol and finding the people that you need to be involved in that protocol is you have to build some sort of foundation. You have to have a true understanding of where you're implementing the protocol, who you're trying to get, what might be the barriers. And so what you want to do is you want to know the population of who you're actually trying to get. What are the inclusion exclusion? Where do those people hang out? Why do they come into treatment? How do they come into treatment? Are they mostly brought in by the criminal justice system, or are they people that walk off the street? As well as the agency. What kind of individuals does the agency attract? Do they get referred by a certain physician's office? Are they a certain socioeconomic status? Are they a certain ethnic group? What is the actual agency made of? And what kind of programs are offered at the agency? Is there child care provided? Is there job skills classes and so forth? So you really want to understand the agency itself. You also want to think about the client flow. Do they usually come in on Mondays because they've gotten busted for DUIs over the weekend? Is it really a continuous flow that people enter the treatment agency at any given time? Are there certain orientations that people can only go on Tuesday and Thursday to get enrolled in the agency and so forth? The other thing that we all kind of struggle with are seasonal changes, and that's, the holidays as well as weather stuff. Is the weather gotten really nice outside so people are less likely to come into treatment because they're out playing at the park or doing whatever, or is it getting really rainy and cold and so people are seeking some sort of shelter if they don't have shelter? as well as, let's say, like the New Year's is always a good time because people are always, I'm going to get sober this year, I'm going to do better, I'm going to keep a job, and those kind of things. So you want to think about those kind of environmental influences on recruitment. The other thing you want to know is you want to think about what resources are already available. And so you want to think about the CTPs. Do they have great connections with the courts, with the probation officers? Do they have other treatment agencies that they can talk to and branch out to as far as getting people to know about the study? What about the RRTC or the university involved? Do they have a recruitment line that they have? Do they have publications that they put out at the RRTC side that would somehow capture the audience or the population that you're trying to get at, as well as community resources? In Portland, we have Outside In, which is a treatment agency, but they provide other services, and it's really kind of for homeless youth. And so you want to think about those things. And you also want to think about the competition for participants. Are there other alternative treatments in the community that might be free, that people would be more likely to go to other treatment agencies or seek the treatment in different ways than your research population, than your research study? Is there other competition for patients? Is there local regulations that would restrict the individuals from coming to your agency? Or are there other laws that prohibit such exposure? There's also IRB variability, of course, and so you got to think about what the IRB has to do with recruitment and what they may have influence on what you can and can't do when you're thinking about recruiting people. Jennifer's talked a little bit about the stakeholders involved. You know, you've got the sponsor, which is NIDA in our case, and what are their interests and what are they willing to put emotionally as well as monetarily into recruiting, successful recruiting. You've got the lead node who might be able to provide additional insight into, well, you know, we've done this kind of a thing. They also might be able to provide some tools, and they also have a stakeholder position in the sense that they want the study to run successfully, obviously. You've got the local university, RRTC, and then the agency itself. So you're balancing a lot of things, as Jennifer mentioned before, when you're thinking about, but this is all part of how to build the system to understand why you're recruiting the individuals, how you can get them, and what kind of environment you need to recruit them into a successful study. Jennifer, do you want to talk about the systems level?
Sure. I'm going to take back my control. This is like a tug of war between Lynn and I. Okay, well, what we wanted to do, so obviously when you're thinking about recruitment, the first thing that comes to mind is actually getting people through the door that are potentially eligible for this study, determining their eligibility, and then randomizing them into the trial. So at the end of the day, that's what recruitment is. I think one of the things that we were thinking about as we thought about this is that you do that. That sounds very simple in some ways. Obviously, there's a lot of work that goes into that, and it can be, depending on the nature of your trial, incredibly challenging and take up an incredible amount of time. And you also need to do that in the context of a lot of different things. So the CCTN is the CTN is a very large structure, as I think most of us know, of 16 nodes, hundred community treatment programs, and hundreds of employees and staff and researchers and academics all working for a common goal to implement clinical trials and improve drug abuse treatment. Within that system, perhaps more so than you might have experienced on other trials that you might have worked on that are smaller in scope, there are a lot of people involved in it, and there are a lot of potential constraints and also things that are potentially very helpful and empowering when you're conducting your activity. So at the end of the day, if the bottom line is to get folks through the door and randomize them, it's useful to understand those constraints and those barriers and those facilitators, if you will, towards making recruitment successful in the CTN. And all of these people have a vested interest. We're using the term stakeholder a lot, and this is again about the context in which we conduct research. So within NIDA, there's something called the CCTN, and not all of you may identify that acronym, but it's the Center for the Clinical Trials Network, and that's the NIDA staff who really advocate and collaborate and work on behalf of the CTN and really make this happen. Now, they have people at NIDA that they report to talk about our progress, how resources are being spent, how studies are progressing, the findings that are coming out of the studies, and if those findings are being disseminated into the research and clinical community. And so they have a very vested interest in what we're doing, and it's a really important role that they play, because without the commitment of the federal government, we can't conduct the research that we do. So they're one of the people that are often looking at our recruitment. You also have a protocol and a lead node that may or may not be housed within your node. So for example, in the study that I'm involved with, CTN 30, we have a lead node that's housed at McLean Hospital in the Northern New England node, and we also have a local site that's actually very, very closely annexed to where I work. And so we have the benefit of having those two entities, the lead node and a local site, in the same place, but that's certainly not always the case. So you might have somebody from a lead node calling, asking you how recruitment's going and what are you doing. And those aren't necessarily the people that you report directly to, but they have a huge stake in this because they're the ones who worked in collaboration to develop this trial. They answer to NIDA and other researchers in NIDA, the CCTN, and they're really thinking about what they know to be optimal for recruitment, but they may not always understand the local systems and the local constraints that you work in. You also have this protocol. So you might find, and again, a protocol is basically the rules of the study. It's how the study is going to be run, and the things you can and can't do. Excuse me. So when you think about recruitment, what's interesting is that, it starts out as we need to go find some people and pull them into a trial, but it actually becomes a lot more complicated as you go through it, because there are things about the protocol and about the ways that we're permitted to conduct research that put constraints on your recruitment. Another factor is the DSMB, and just to avoid acronym speak too much, that's the Data Safety and Monitoring Board. And that board is an independent group of people that review the protocol and how the study is conducted on a regular basis. And they can be very involved in recruitment. So as you start to think about this, it starts out as a group of people, typically project coordinators and research assistants in collaboration with a study site that want to find a way to get people into a study. But as you start to understand it, there's all these systems operating around it that I think are important to understand, and it helps to understand why decisions are made in the way that they are. So the Data Safety Monitoring Board, the DSMB, are monitoring a trial, and they are then working or directing the lead node on occasion about the study performance, how recruitment is going. So they are a key stakeholder that the lead node and CCTN are looking to for guidance. And the reason that they're independent is because that helps ensure that there is minimizes the potential for bias to drive decision making because they are more independent. You also have an IRB. So, for example, the lead node might say, you need to recruit more, why don't you use this strategy? But you're working in a system where your IRB won't allow you to do that because it's not considered appropriate within what they're doing. Excuse me, I can't multitask. I'm just getting a note in here. Okay. And then what you have, which is I think very unique to the CTN, is you have, in addition to this lead node with their big stake in what you're doing, you have a node, RRTC, a Regional Research and Training Center. And those people are there to provide support to a community treatment program in doing the research, to provide technical assistance and guidance, and they may have their own set of ways of recruiting and providing guidance. And these people are really critical as you're developing a recruitment plan, because they should have some expertise that they then share with the local site. But they also have expectations and demands that they can place on the RAs and the site coordinators and even the site PI in terms of their expectations about recruitment. And then there's also the NODE CTP, and that's really the community treatment program, of which I know at least some of you are housed at, or you're actually in the field doing the work, doing the recruitment. Can we think of other things that are stakeholders or factors that play into the developing of a recruitment plan? I don't know if anyone has other things that aren't on here.
Jen, would you like to open up the phone lines?
Sure.
Okay. Cynthia, can we go ahead and open up the phone lines so people feel free to give feedback?
Yes, we can. One moment, please.
Jen, you might want to restate your question.
Sure, and there may or not be. I'm just realizing that Lynn and I have been talking for a bit now, and just thought, I don't know how people react to this, but I think for us, one of the important things is to appreciate the context in which you're working and why recruitment is so important and why we do that. So I'm curious to know if other people have other systems that are playing on them being able to recruit, or other factors that can be barriers or facilitators to successful recruiting. That was a long question. Any thoughts on this or reactions to what we've been talking about so far?
Well, Jennifer, this is Lynn. I will jump in for a second.
Sure.
One thing that we haven't really talked about, we've talked about the agency being a stakeholder, but we haven't talked about, and we'll talk about a little down the road, but just to bring up at this point is the actual staff of the agency.
Mm-hmm.
And the system level approach of how the agency at large. We usually have the administration behind us as far as wanting the protocol to be successful, and we have, of course, the research staff. But everyone, even from the front office person to the operator on the phone at this treatment agency, they are real stakeholders, and they also are part of that system of successful recruitment and implementation. If they don't know what's going on, if they're not supportive of the system, they can really be a barrier, or they can really be an advocate for the protocol and for the success of it.
Mm-hmm. Other thoughts that people have or challenges when they're recruiting that are related to the different organizations that you work with?
Ladies, this is the operator. I just wanted to let everyone know we seem to be having a situation with me being able to open all the lines at this time. So if you do have a question or if you would like to make a comment, press *1 on your touch-tone telephone. Again, we can open your lines with *1 feature. So again, if you have a question or comment, you can press *1 at this time.
So why don't I go on? But again, we want to encourage people to ask questions or jump in whenever they'd like to. So as we move away from these big systems organizations, I think it's important as you start to work on a recruitment plan is to identify what is and is not within your sphere of influence. So for example, you can't change your IRB. You can't change what they will and will not allow you to do. You can make requests, you can propose a rationale, and you can develop a strategy, but you can't influence them beyond that. So you have to decide what you can and can't do. It's also important to think about being proactive and anticipating things. So even, for example, to continue with the IRB issue, if you have an idea, I often hear people say, that the IRB won't allow that, or we can't do that here, or there's some way that we won't be able to do that. I really encourage you to be proactive and ask the questions and to really challenge yourself to think outside the box. So trying to think of a concrete example. An example from our site was there's a recruitment technique that's called snowballing. And Sarah, I'm picking on Sarah Schiffman because I sent her a chat saying I was going to. Sarah, if you're on the line, could you press *1 to open up your line?
And Sarah, if you could press *1 on your phone at this time.
Hopefully I didn't just bust Sarah while she went to the restroom.
I am not getting a response from Sarah, but I do have Megan Johnson in the queue.
Oh, thanks, Megan.
Hi.
Hi, Megan. So I'll explain this so that you know what I'm talking about. But one of the things that happened that I thought was really interesting was if you could describe snowballing and what this was. I had heard another site was doing this and thought, oh, well, that's not going to work for us. I can't imagine the IRB doing it or that will work. And I think the lesson learned for me was that it was actually a really interesting technique. So I don't know if you want to give that example.
Well, the technique just involves asking participants in the study to refer family or friends that they think might be a good fit. And then if they refer someone and that person comes in and does a screening visit, a baseline, then the person who referred them who's in the study would receive a $10 gift card. Or that's how we did at our site, a $10 gift card. But I think at other sites it might be a different form of reimbursement. But I think we thought we would have trouble with our IRB because of issues of confidentiality, that we would know that they knew each other, and we'd have to say, we want to give you a $10 gift card because somebody, even though we can't say what their name is, came in and we know you referred them, but we can't say anything. So those kinds of difficult issues with confidentiality, but it turned out that our IRB was fine with it.
And I just think that's a nice example, and I'm using myself as the person because I think we all can fall into these traps where I had assumed that it wouldn't get through, and the local site at our node, which has done a terrific job, and Megan's our project coordinator, really went ahead and just asked. And we found out that we could do something that I had thought that we wouldn't be able to do, and that was based on my previous experience, but IRBs change, and decisions change, and the climate changes. So it's just useful to keep thinking about that, and that's how you can try and use your system to leverage it where you can and be successful.
Jennifer, could I jump in for
Sure, please, Lynn.
I know that at our CODA start site, we actually do something a little less formal than that we do provide cards, research cards and brochures to the participants and say, please let your friends know that we're out here and if anybody would like to come in and talk to us about the project. So we don't do some sort of a referral thing, but we do branch out and we do reach out to the participants, the existing participants, and say, please pass the word on that such a program exists.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice example, Lynn, of also taking an idea and adapting it to what's realistic or what's useful in your situation. And so a lot of times I think we hear, on national calls, at least on CTN 30, we've done this, and I know this happens in other CTN trials where people get on the phone, and thank you very much, Megan. People get on the phone and say, what do you do, and what do you do? And I think for those conversations to be useful, we need to hear what the site is saying and the strategy that they're suggesting, and then adapt it as needed to make it work in your climate. So, for example, some people can't give cash. Some people have to give gift cards. It doesn't mean you can't give an incentive. It just means you have to find it. You have to make it work within the constraints of the system that you're working within. So I think as you get involved with studies, and for those of you who already are heavily involved with studies, it's important just to think about, avoiding that knee-jerk reaction I think that we all sometimes have of dismissing an idea de facto without really thinking, is there something we can take away from this to make it work for us? And again, I just go back to my snowballing snafu, because I think that had they listened to me at the site, we would not have had that really successful strategy that they're using very well. The other point that I wanted to mention is something that I called measurement-driven decision-making, and I'll try and explain what that means, but I think one of the things that we don't use enough of is using our resources. And so, for example, the lead node is able to provide you through the Data and Statistics Center a lot of information, and they ask you for a lot of information about the characteristics of the sample that you're recruiting, what's happening to people that call, what happens when people don't show up. All of this information is coming in, and I think sometimes we can find ourselves just filling out that information to give it to the lead node and not really embracing the rich data that we've got when we do that. So, for example, if you're having people call, if you run an ad, or you put something in the paper, or you do outreach to community treatment providers or practitioners that might provide referrals for a trial. It's one thing to get the referrals and get those calls in. It's another to really make that information very rich data. And it's as simple as saying, what outreach have we done? And when a phone call comes in, finding out where finding out where the person heard about the study, collecting that information, and then also trying to understand how many calls you need. So, for example, you've got all this information. You've found people calling you. You've tracked where they're coming from, and then you also are tracking of the people that call, how many people wind up actually coming in for a visit. So not only are they calling, but they're eligible, and they actually show up. So each of those points in times are points in times that you can use to provide you with information. So for most trials, by about 3 or 4 months into the trial, you should be able to know how many calls you get, how many calls you require in order to hit your randomization numbers for the coming month. So, for example, if you have one randomization for every 30 calls you get in, you can then adjust your recruitment activities so that you're pumping up the volume of calls, knowing that you need at least 30 calls to get one randomization in. And does that make sense to people? This would be a good place for somebody to jump in and say, Jennifer, you didn't make any sense, because I kind of stumbled through that. So what I mean by measurement-driven decision-making is I believe very strongly that if you use the numbers that you've got, the data that you're collecting about your recruitment activities, provided from all the resources and all the different systems tracking this information, what you will find is that you can then make adjustments, you can plan, and you can utilize your resources efficiently by using that information to drive what you're going to do in the coming months. Make sense? Any questions about that?
And ladies, I was able to open up the lines at this time, so currently all lines are open.
Thanks. So I'm just curious, do people have any questions about that? Okay, because this is one thing I see people not doing as much as I think that they could, is really using these numbers to plan and manage their system. This is also useful for actively managing timelines and really avoiding that trap we can fall into, which I call passivity. And I don't mean that in a pejorative sense. I really mean that we just sort of become complacent because we've got so many things and so many interests and so many stakeholders competing for our time that we kind of go on autopilot. And I really think for recruitment to be successful over time, it's working against the inertia that we sometimes can all fall into. This also works for team building, and I'm just noticing the time, so I'm going to move a little bit faster if that's feedback for you, Lynn. In terms of thinking about the systems is developing that team so that you all have a common vision and that recruitment is a participatory process. It's not left to one person at your program, and that we think about it in terms of how we develop our protocol. And I appreciate that many times research assistants and study coordinators may not have necessarily been involved in protocol development, but I think it is important to understand how a protocol can be developed with recruitment in mind. So it's just something to think about as you move on. And if you have an opportunity to weigh in on protocol development, think about the implications of the design for recruitment. Okay. We've talked a lot about stakeholders, so we won't go on with that. And Lynn alluded to it as well in terms of understanding who controls and who holds the decision-making at the agency and at the node. So I won't go on to that. But I think there is something to think about in terms of challenging us all in terms of our staff characteristics. Recruitment is something that needs a lot of good personality, a lot of a sense of how you as a recruiter relate to people, how they interpret, how you respond to them. But the trick is it also requires a lot of detail. Remember, go back to those numbers that I was talking about, and tracking and understanding how you can be successful as a recruiter. So it doesn't always the case that interpersonal savvy and that detail-oriented nature fall into one person. Often that's the case, but it isn't always the case. So it's important to understand what your strengths are relative to other people on your research team, and so that you can build a team of recruitment, a recruitment team that really leverages both of those things. Because very often you'll find when you talk to research participants, one of the reasons they keep coming back, or one of the reasons they went from picking up the phone to actually showing up, is because of who they talk to on the phone. And that's not a clinician in most cases. It's not a physician. It's really you guys who are picking up the phones and what happens there. And so really understanding for the project coordinators too, thinking about how you can use the staff that you have most effectively to have them fit. So if you've got someone who's a little less comfortable with recruitment, really focusing on trying to put them where they're best utilized. And then also providing them with the training and development to understand how they are perceived and read by people. So, practicing with them. And Lynn does a really nice thing. I don't know, Lynn, if you're going to talk about that in a few minutes, but about your mock participant.
Sure, I can add that.
Where you have the actor. I think that would be really interesting because it's another example of it. Okay. The other thing is that, as a lead node, I can certainly tell you that we really, really welcome communication, and that that we want that to be bidirectional. When people get busy, we don't always find that we're perhaps as successful as we'd like to be, because there's always room for improvement. But I would hope that most people on our CTN 30 project feel like we have prompt response and open dialogue with the sites. But I think that a lot of times lead nodes really welcome getting that communication back from the CTPs. And there are a number of nodes in particular that I can think of where the local site involved in our prescription opioid study, that CTN 30, really go out of their way to point things out, to make suggestions, to ask us questions, and make sure that that lead node, the local node, and the CTP are all involved very collaboratively. So if you do wonder as a recruiter whether it's appropriate to contact your local node RRTC to talk to the PI about what you're struggling with or what you're finding successful or new ideas that you have, I really encourage you to go ahead and ask, and certainly to share those also with the lead node, because our recruitment's most successful when all of these entities are working collaboratively. The other thing is understanding and integrating research into the CTP, because often in a CTP environment, recruitment depends or is yoked to the other clinical activities that are going on in the program. And so the more that research staff can connect, collaborate, and become involved with the clinical program, I think the better off you are. So do think about that as another opportunity. We've already talked a little bit about this in terms of the position of the lead node. What does the lead node want to hear? I can tell you that from my perspective, again, that the lead node wants to hear something. We want to hear how you're doing. We want to hear your frustrations. We want to hear your successes. And they want to know what's going on. I think the biggest concern that we have is that when we don't hear from sites, why aren't they telling us what's going on? Why aren't they asking us about recruitment? Often that's because everything is going well. But lead nodes really do like to hear what's happening at the local site, and we really value the input and ideas you have, because we've gotten a lot of really great recruitment ideas by working collaboratively with sites and then having sites share success stories or the struggles that they're having. So we really want to encourage lines of communication open, and sometimes that can be difficult for somebody who's new to the CTN or new to research to really feel comfortable launching that question at the voice over the phone. Unfortunately, I have many people I have not met that work on CTN 30, so I'm like that voice on the phone that, depending on any given day and what's the problem, may sound more assertive than she perhaps intends to be. But I really do think that most investigative teams really welcome having people comment, provide input, and so that's part of using your system to be a successful recruiter. The other thing to think about is when you're working at a CTP, is thinking about your role as the RRTC. And if you don't understand how your program, your CTP, or you working as a research assistant or study coordinator work within this RRTC, or what your relationship to your specific node's RRTC is, I really encourage you to understand that, because within the CTN, we do rely on the node RRTCs to help the CTPs conduct trials, and part of that is providing technical assistance for recruitment. So it's, again, using the systems that you've got and the resources available to you, and so reaching out to the RRTC, understanding the role, understanding who the appropriate contacts are there to provide the technical assistance to you in building and being successful. We have these tremendous resources in Wells a wealth of experience at the local ROTCs that I think sometimes is perhaps not utilized as effectively as it could be. So with that, we're going to move on to Lesson 4, Lynn.
Sure. I'll just briefly talk about what Jennifer brought up a second ago, which is not on the slides, which is the standardized patients. And one of the things you may or may not have heard about this in our node, we have a standardized patient is an individual who has been trained to take on a certain persona. They have a whole history of who they are, what their life is like, what kind of drug use they've used, what kind of employment they've had, and they have been trained in this role, and they come in and actually walk through the intake process of the clinical trial. And we've done this in now 3 of our studies, and we're going to implement it in all of the Wave 2 sites of Stage 12. But in any way, that person comes in and they are really in character and in role, and then after they do a certain portion of the intake or the consenting or whatnot, and then they provide feedback on how the process went and how they felt from a participant's standpoint. Now, we all do this, we all practice and stuff with our friends or our coworkers or so forth, but it's very much a different experience when you have somebody that you don't know that comes into the office and provides feedback. And he's not an expert in research as per se, but he's just a common person, but he is an actor, so he does take on a persona. And he provides feedback on how he felt and how the recruitment went as far as whether he felt like he wanted to be vested, whether he wanted to learn about the project or not. And doing those kind of practicings can really provide feedback that you may not have thought about, or your coworker, when they walked through the process, may not have thought about as far as accessing the agency itself. And so your PIs at your ROTC have heard a lot about this, and if you would like more information about standardized patients, you're welcome to contact me directly, and I can provide you some insight on that. So now that we've talked about, we've really built the foundation of what you need to do when you're thinking about developing a recruitment plan. We've talked a lot about the stakeholders. We've talked about we've talked about the systems level and how recruitment really isn't just one person going out and trying to find a participant to be in the study. We need to put it all together. And how do we put it all together? One thing that when you're doing you're getting involved with a CTN trial is that each of the lead nodes asks you to provide a recruitment plan. And the intent is for you to really sit down with your ROTC and your agency and think about how this is actually going to happen at your agency, with thinking about all the things that we talked about so far this morning, the stakeholders, the system, and all that kind of thing, and how we're going to do this, how we're going to recruit people into our clinical trial. And so the one thing that Jennifer has touched upon a couple of times is that one size does not fit all. Just because something's working in one agency doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work in another. And so you want to think about, the first approach is to think about what you think is going to be the best plan and then write that out. And you want to have people look at it and provide feedback like, yeah, I think that's going to work, or no, you haven't thought about this. And it's really a group process and really let's all put our heads together. The other important thing to really think about is that everything that you submit and everything that you do around participants has to be IRB approved, of course. And again, going back to every IRB is different, and therefore if one IRB says it's okay, another one may not. But you need to think about the IRB regulations around that. The other thing that's most important is that you develop a plan, but that plan is not concrete. It has to ebb and flow just like your recruitment does, and you have to constantly reevaluate whether or not the system still works. Are there seasonal changes that have happened? Is there some other environmental thing that happened? For one example is we implemented Spanish Met, which was CTN 21, and that was about Spanish individuals doing the MI, motivational interviewing. And all of a sudden in Portland there was this immigration outbreak or immigration big, huge effort. And so a lot of our participants were concerned about leaving their house, and that really actually affected recruitment and retention. And so are those kind of things happening? What is happening that makes people either not want to come into treatment, not want to engage? So you got to think about those kind of things. You need to change your recruitment plan based upon those kind of things. So one of the best things to do is to brainstorm. Jennifer talked a lot about how don't assume that it's not going to fit or it's not going to work. Talk with people. Try it. Give it a try. If it doesn't work, then you don't do it again, or you put it on the table for a while and then you try it again a couple of months down. Think about all the resources that you have available. Think about advertising. Think about where your potential participants would hang out, what would attract them, and if you can't get people into recruitment, talk with people about what are the barriers? What is stopping people from coming into the agency and joining the protocol? Is it financial reasons? Is it that they don't like the color of the flyer? I mean, really talk with people and think about what is happening in the environment. Here's a couple of examples of resources. We've got the typical flyers. You've got Dear Colleague letters. These letters are sent out in POTS, for example. We send out all the letters to people that have X numbers or that are chronic pain physicians in the area, and we just say, hey, did you know that this protocol is going on?
Lynn, just so everyone knows, the CTN 30 is also called.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. And that's a multi-site trial that I know that has 9 sites right now actively recruiting. So and Lynn's one of the sites, so that's why we keep referring to that one.
Yeah. There's also brochures. We all know that NIDA has developed formal brochures that we can hand out that have been approved by the NIDA Press. We also locally develop local brochures for the projects. Of course, those are all IRB approved, but it's much more tailored to our environment and much more of a layman's term and what we think would be. So we have 2 different brochures that people might see and get connected with. There's, of course, radio, TV, newspaper ads, not just the big newspaper in the area, but the little community suburb newspapers, the alternative newspapers, all those. There's internet ads. There's places that you can post advertisements for research, all the way down to, on Amazon, or on Craigslist and stuff. There's federal, state, and IRB registries. There's billboards. We talked about snowballing and word of mouth. Can others think of other things that we have not talked about here? Can we open the lines for a couple minutes?
And Lynn, maybe this would be a good time while we're opening the lines to, I believe that Liz has the poll ready, that experience poll, because I think that would be helpful to get a sense of the...
Yeah, go ahead and open up the lines, and I'll go ahead and try to get the experience poll going again.
And lines are open.
Christy Thomas, are you on the line? Davina, are you available? Trying to find someone that could provide some other sort of ideas about what other sort of recruitment's happening in the CTN or outside of the CTN.
So, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, Davina.
Oh, trying to get through the line.
So Davina has done 3 studies and has been the monitor for a couple of other studies. Can you think of other ways of recruitment?
Oh, wow. Nice. One of the biggest things that's helped us in our area is just really building that community with different referral sources in our agency, knowing the different types of services that these clients are going to go through and making sure that we put flyers there, brochures there, contact information. We also go and give presentations at the local addiction professionals of Lane County meeting. Kind of lets others in our area know what we're doing. But really getting the word out there to the community that we have something like this going on that is a part of our treatment helps quite a bit.
Great. Does anybody else have other experience?
And I see the poll is up and we have 10 responses, so we'd love to see a few more in terms of your experience with recruitment and retention while we're chatting. How about some of these folks with 5 years or more of experience, 6 people with 5 years or more of experience? I'd love to hear from you guys what some of the things that you do or the experiences that you've had that are more successful than others, or just your general approach to using these strategies. And some of you, I know who you are. So.
We've got a shy group here.
I'm not sure if they're shy or we're just having trouble with the.
Cynthia, this is Liz. Are the lines all open?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
What to say?
Okay, Jenna, just go ahead.
Okay. So Megan, I'm going to actually, because I know that you're on the line, I'm going to pick on you again. I mean, I guess as you're reacting to this, what do you think are any reactions to what we're talking about, or other concrete ideas you have about what developing a recruitment plan actually means?
Well, I think that you have to be willing to alter your plan, because, I mean, I know that our study, we started recruiting in 2006, and what worked for us in 2006 isn't necessarily still working for us. But,
tell us about that. Can you think of an example of how you've adapted?
Well, in the beginning, we were getting a lot of referrals from hospitals, clinics in the area, and I can't say for sure why that was, but it really helped our recruitment through probably last year around this time. When that just kind of fell off from us, even though we were still calling those places and sending out dear colleague letters and posting flyers in the area, it just wasn't working for us. So we actually decided to run a radio ad, which we had really not considered before, but we thought, let's just try it, see if it works for us. And we weren't really sure how it was going to go, but it ended up being very, very successful for us. So we have run 2 radio ads since last fall. And so I think that's just an example of how you have to be willing to change and do something you might not have thought of doing in the beginning or wanted to do in the beginning, but just to be able to keep recruitment going and not get into a lapse where you're not having anyone.
Yeah, in the case you're describing, too, there was some resistance, I might suggest, about paying for a media run because they are expensive.
Right, yeah. But then it turned out that because it was so successful, that the amount that we spent per participant randomized was actually not that much. So it's just because it just did so well. So when we thought about it that way, it was like, maybe we should do this again.
That's a really good example of that, using your data, because when you find out that something is upfront is expensive, actually ends up being more economic because you finished the study on time,
right.
And you actually save money because it's very expensive to keep the site up and running. I've heard estimates is around $30,000 to $40,000 a month to keep
right.
the site operating. That's a really good example of how you can think about that.
Great. Does anybody else have any feedback or other things that about recruitment?
Okay.
Something else, Lynn? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, can we go back? But go ahead.
Oh, I wanted to just mention one thing, or ask a question of you, Lynn, is when you decide to do a radio ad, because that is something that I see sites doing more and more, but it's with relatively scarce dollars. I mean, many large pharmaceutical trials that are sponsored by pharma have budgets of, I can recall a study that I did where we had, I think, between $50,000 and $60,000 just for ads, which is certainly not what I have in the CTN. It's a really very different model of recruitment, and we certainly can be successful. We have to think about it differently, though. What kind of strategies do you or anyone on the call use to think about what the best radio ad is, or where to go? What are the steps that you take in deciding which media outlet to use? Like, for example, which station? Do you go to a rock station or a talk radio, or how does that work?
I think that's a really interesting question, and I think one of the ways that we would approach making that decision is really talking with the participants that actually are enrolled and kind of getting to know. That goes back to getting to know the clients that you're trying to get at. And that doesn't mean to stereotype or to categorize them, but at the same time, the more you understand about the people that you're trying to enroll, the more likely you are to be able to hit those targets. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you, Lynn.
You're welcome. Liz, can we go back to the slides? Oh, sorry. She told me to click on it and it'll reappear. Sorry. I just provided a couple of examples of things that our sites locally here use. The first thing that you're looking at is a study flow. And so this helps with participants to understand what is required of them in the study. This is obviously one of the more simple studies that we did early on, but this helps with when you're trying to recruit people and people are overwhelmed with, well, what really is going to be needed of me. So when you're going through that process, it really lays out what happens when and what is needed, so people understand what. And we also have had these in like the lobbies and stuff. So when people are looking at the brochures, they can say, "Well, what does this really mean?" And they can see like a study flow of it. The next one is an example of one of the pull tag flyers that we have. You know, it's a basic, it's colorful, so it's not just one of those black and white things. It's got people that they can relate to. It's easy pull tags, so that way people don't have to jot down phone numbers. They get basic information about the study, and that they'll get reimbursed. And then the other thing that we've done at sites is this has to do more with retention, which is what we'll move into in a second, but we have follow-up reminders. So not only do we have flyers around the agency and around other places about the study itself, but we have flyers that remind people, hey, are you part of the study? Call so-and-so to get in here for your follow-up visit.
Lynn, this is a bit of a sidebar, but it's a funny story about doing this. It's so important because, believe it or not, people sometimes forget about their participation in a study or that was supposed to happen. And this relates to the slide 21 and 23 that you did. This was a long time ago, and it was an epidemiologic long-term follow-up study, but we used to have a woman who would go down to do outreach in homeless shelters, and she made herself a placard, and it was literally like a sandwich board that you'd see in Manhattan, and all it said was, "Were you a part of Project Light? Talk to me." And she would have people come up that had forgotten completely about being in the study and didn't realize that they needed to come back for follow-up. And so I think that that might not fly with everybody today. This was a long time ago. It's just an idea that you don't assume that people remember this. Many people have a lot of competing interests and demands in their lives, and this study is not number one on their plate. Unlike for us, where it often is the primary thing that we're doing in our job. The other thing I just wanted to quickly mention on slide 21, if you can move back to that.
Sure.
I love this. This is Lynn actually did one for the pain and opiate use study, the CTN 30 that we're talking about, because I saw this and was so excited about it, because one can't minimize the importance of explaining in simple ways the study, and this relates to retention as well, is being able to simply tell a story about what they need to do, what will be involved and what won't be involved is really important, because it can be very overwhelming for people. You know, most people in their lives have not read a 10 to 20 page consent form, and that's really part of recruitment too, is encouraging people to participate. And they need to honestly and ethically understand what's involved. And if you go back to this idea of informed consent as a process, having a good way to tell the story of expectations and commitments in the study is so important. The reason it's also important is as we go forward, maybe we could loop back to this in our retention, is having something like this helps people to remember that they knew what they were getting themselves into, that they understood it. It helps to refresh them so that, after they finish that 5-hour baseline assessment, which we have in CTN 30, just as an example, because I know that one best. That's a very long assessment. I would not want people to think that every time they see us, they're going to spend a half day at our program. I certainly wouldn't participate in a study like that. So having something like this and tailoring it to your study helps people to say, what's going to be more complicated and what's going to be more simple, and that helps them to decide to participate and fit this into their lives. So I just wanted to mention that, because I think this tool is really, really very, very useful, and I've only seen it before written down with bullets, and having these visual images it's a very nice way to do it with the flowchart.
Thanks, Jennifer. And actually, we'll promote right now on July 24th, we're actually doing a similar webinar about informed consent, and we'll talk a lot more about this process. So let's go ahead and move to retention. Am I there? I think I'm there. Oh, there we go. Okay, Jennifer.
Okay. So what we're going to cover in this lesson is, again, we're not able to tell you every single strategy about retention, but I do think it's important to have that plan. So the first thing is, again, I seem to be the pitch person for the importance of this stuff, because I get really excited about it, and I guess I have this wish that other people are as excited about it as I am, because I think it's so important in terms of the people that do this work the gift they give of their time to do all of this hard work for retention is incredibly valuable, and I want to make sure that people really know that they're valued, and one of the only ways I can do that is to say it so much. So I really want people to understand and feel like it fits in a context of important science that we do. The next thing we're going to do is talk a little bit about our philosophy or our approach to retention and how to approach it and be successful about it. And then Lynn's going to cover, again, some nice concrete details about developing a retention plan and some of the beginning steps that you want to pull together. And then we'll talk a little bit about retention challenges because, as we all know, if we've been doing retention, and as you will discover as you move on, the population, a drug-dependent population, can be often among the more challenging people to retain in a study. That's true, actually, of everyone, and I don't want to do a disservice to the people that participate in our studies to suggest they are somehow uniquely problematic, because this is a problem across all clinical research. But a lot of the folks we work with have a lot of competing things in their lives, and then ironically, when they start to do better, their lives get busier, they might get jobs, and so that adds a new challenge to what we're doing. So we want to talk and acknowledge about the retention challenges that we have. Okay. Okay, so when we think about retention, often we don't want to think that just getting someone into a study means that we were successful. And I think there's a natural tendency to think that recruitment is the most important thing. And if you think about the course of trial, what tends to happen is that at the beginning of the study, all eyes are on recruitment. Recruitment, recruitment, recruitment. And what then tends to happen is that follow-up is perhaps not as much attended to, and I would say this probably comes from a lot of those stakeholders we were talking about before, because so much attention is focused on recruitment. The danger of that is that it's a little bit of a setup to have the pendulum swing all the other way when people start looking at follow-up and going, oh, wait a minute, follow-up, follow-up, follow-up. And that can be a bit jarring to site staff when we've spent so much time talking about recruitment, and suddenly now all we want to talk about is follow-up. And to some extent, I think that's a natural thing that happens over the lifespan of a clinical trial. But I think it's really important to think about retention as something that's critical because of its outcomes. I mean, if we don't have people coming back, the quality of our answers to our scientific questions is diminished because of it. It's important for a lot of different reasons. These are just a couple. One of the things I wanted to throw up is dosage. If people, we can't say that just because someone was randomized to a trial that they actually received an adequate dose of the treatment, whether it's a behavioral or pharmacological. We need to understand that people have to come to these visits. We have to retain them over the course of time to truly be able to answer the questions that the study was designed to do. So, for example, again, just giving, if there are 8 sessions available over 8 weeks for a behavioral intervention, if people only attend 2 of those and they're included in the analysis, is that really an adequate dose? And I'll just skip to this. This is my little visual. The idea behind this is we've got 2 studies, 2 treatments to compare. We've got a red treatment and a blue treatment. And if you look at this, what happens is that, for example, Alice, so they're seeing 8 weeks. Let's imagine that they're supposed to come weekly for their behavioral treatment. So they have an opportunity to get 8 hours of treatment. If Alice and Brenda drop out roughly around week 4, and then Wanda drops out at week 5, we're losing valuable information from them, and the question then becomes, did they really get the treatment? If the red treatment doesn't work, did they actually really get the treatment that we said they were going to? And what that means is that if people aren't coming to the intervention, it really draws into question when we get a finding or we don't get a finding, why we got the finding that we did. Was it really because the intervention worked, or the intervention didn't work, or was it because people were dropping out of the treatment? And this is a really critical issue that we're starting to focus more and more, rightfully so, on in the CTN. So I just wanted to mention that. The other thing to think about is most of our trials are what's called intention to treat trials. That means when somebody randomizes, they count. They count even if they drop out 3 days later. they can, and this is there's some really good reasons why we do this when we're answering these questions. These are very important questions. We don't want to bias the way we interpret our data. So we assume that everyone randomized counts. Now, we all know that when somebody drops out 3 days later, it's really hard for us to think that they actually benefited from the treatment because they left after 3 days. So what happens often is something called, so what we lose when we do that is we lose our ability to answer the meaningful questions that we're asking. So everybody counts. That's why lead nodes are always saying, you got to keep people in the study. Everybody counts, even if they drop out very quickly. And what tends to happen is an approach called last observation carried forward. So where somebody was at the point when they dropped out counts for the rest of the trial. That's the information that we communicate about that person. So let's imagine we have a medication that we really believe in, that we want to give, and we want to compare it against some other type of medication or placebo. If somebody drops out 3 days after getting our medication that we think is really important medication, and they're still not doing well, that information is going to count in terms of how we interpret the efficacy of this particular drug. Now, there's a lot of complexity that goes on in this type of statistical analysis, but the bottom line is, and the take-home message is, everyone counts. So retention is just so important in being able to answer and interpret the outcomes of our trials. Okay, these are just 2 examples. I'll skip through this. So when you think about it, I think it's important for all of us to understand sort of what our retention philosophy is. And from our perspective, there are multiple determinants. Retention is multidimensional. And what that means is that it's not just about the participant. It's not just about their behavior. It's about everything else within the system. So it's the individual that's baselined. It's the setting in which the research occurs. It's the intervention that's offered. It's the relationship between the individual participant and all of the research staff, from the clinicians to the RAs to the coordinator to the PI, all of those factors. And it's also how the individual responds post-treatment and how they're doing in their lives. There's a box up here for other. What other things do people think? I'm going to open the phone lines again, Cynthia. What other things do people think contribute to retention that they think are important as they think about their approach to retention?
I'll be there after work. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Lines are open.
Christy, how about you? Or Elisa? I'd really love to hear from folks about their approach to things. So what other things are important when we start to talk about retention as opposed to recruitment?
Talking about like getting physical and things like that important. Connecting with future services, referral.
I think somebody just spoke and I couldn't hear them, so if they could move their mouth closer to their phone.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi.
Hi, it's Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
So for us, one of the things we offer to participants is what they may benefit for by coming in for some of those follow-up visits, such as that one visit where they get a physical. We say we'll share the blood work with you or the results of your physical, or we may offer to give you further referral information or help connect you with other services depending on what's going on in your life at that point.
Oh, that's interesting. So that's part of building that relationship and how they're doing post-treatment.
Yep.
Thank you.
I'll go ahead and jump in, Jennifer. This is Lynn. One thing you want to do is provide a welcoming environment, and we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about building a retention plan too, is what people make a place where people will want to come back and feel like they are cared for and that they're respected and that what they're doing actually matters.
Mm-hmm. So, Lynn, that goes along the lines of thinking of retention as being more than just the participant's behavior. It's not just about them relapsing and then they don't come back.
Yes.
Yeah, as you know, I agree with that. So let's think a little bit more about this. I think one of the things about having a retention philosophy and an approach to retention is thinking about it proactively. Many potential retention problems can be prevented or minimized before participant enrollment. And what I mean by that is, Lynn gave a great example, is thinking about the setting or the environment that you're conducting the research in. You know, in CTN 10, which was an adolescent buprenorphine trial, one of the things I know at least some of the local sites did was they purchased subscriptions to magazines, and one of the sites that Arno borrowed my son's Nintendo, and we set that up in the clinic because people would then communicate, that communicated to them when they came in for their follow-up visits, they'd have something to do. So if there was a wait or they just wanted to come in a little bit early, they had something to do. Maybe Nintendo wasn't it. I can't remember if there was a game. I can't remember the name of the game, but it was a video game that they could use, and that was trying to anticipate a potential issue that would make people not want to come in. We thought, oh, we want to make this a fun environment for them. You think about it in terms of how you structure your appointments. For example, when you're staffing a project, if all of your clinician time is at 10 to 12 in the morning and 1 to 3 in the afternoon, I would say for most studies that's going to impact your retention. And the reason it's going to do that is because most people's lives do not permit them to be free from 10 to 12 and 1 to 3. Now certainly from the clinic's perspective, I certainly understand why that's the most feasible time for the clinician who probably has many, many other things to do. But I think that it's important to think about the decisions you make. How are they going to impact how you are able to successfully retain people in the study? And just one other thing that I didn't mention before, when I think about retention right now, I'm thinking about retaining them in treatment, and I'm also thinking about retaining them in the research. And those things are related, obviously, but are also distinct. So somebody needs to come for their treatment, but they also need to come for their research. And research often continues past the point of treatment. And so often what you'll see is a drop-off in your recruitment rate after they stop receiving treatment. And I think this goes back to a really important thing that Sarah Shipman mentioned, because Sarah said you want to talk about the benefits of continuing to come in and get your follow-up information. We can't help somebody, we can't refer, and we can't evaluate how they're doing if they don't show up. And it's appropriate and I think important to think about that as you're moving forward with this. The other way you can anticipate and have a good retention philosophy is to think about once a person is enrolled, you need to take measures to enhance and monitor retention. This is again about using the numbers. We want to know when do people typically drop out in this trial. If you notice a pattern that your biggest drop-off rate is between, say, week 4 and week 6, that's a decision point for you. That's a time when you want to take action and come up with a strategy, and we're going to talk about what your retention plan is in a moment. But you want to start thinking, gee, what can I do, if anything, prior to week 4 and during week 4 so that I can see an improvement in my retention rate at week 6. So when we start saying, oh, there's a follow-up problem, really think about going past that and saying, well, where is the follow-up problem? When is it happening? What are the points in time where we start to have the problem and anticipate it? And be proactive, as I've said several times now. The other thing to think about is retention is a decision that the participant makes. And the reason that this is important is people usually, it's an active thing. If they, on balance, can see more pros in returning for a follow-up visit or for their treatment than they see cons, then they are more likely to show up. And it's not just about the money. So the environment that you create is one where you want to encourage the person to make a conscious decision, I'm going to go back because X, Y, and Z. And I think if we rely too much on those incentives, I think that what we lose is all the other benefits that will weigh into a decision. So this is something called the decisional balance in psychology. And so you want the pros of returning to outweigh the cons. And the pros are things like convenience, beneficence and that they're helping people and that this is something that's good for them and as well as for society. It's the incentive and the compensation, the incentive for their time and effort. It's the relationship they have with you. We used to have people in an old HIV trial I did that really loved coming to our building, our office building, because it was a professional suite of offices. They liked how they were treated by everything from the doorman to the snacks that we had to the space that they had to come early and hang out with their buddies that they hadn't seen. And all of those things are what helps a participant make a decision to return. And you really want to go beyond just the incentive. And this is part of our philosophy as well. So I encourage you to add other things into it. I'm not going to ask for people to weigh in, but really think about this and think about your site. And as you're working on a new project, because I know there are a lot of people that are relatively new, think, what is our philosophy? How is it that we want to approach this? How do we make an environment, both with our people, and with our resources, that makes people want to come back? Okay, so some of this I'll just summarize because we've covered some of it. Retention depends on setting and monitoring goals. So if you don't know what your site's goal is in terms of retention, that's a problem right off the bat. So obviously all sites want 100% retention. I think all investigators know that in most cases you're not going to get 100%. And each study does have some minimum expectations as well as where they want their retention to be. So, for example, if you think about recruiting, say, for a study with opioid-dependent patients, and you look at the other sites, and all the other sites are retaining subjects at about 75%, and your retention rate is 65%. I would say that benchmarking against the other sites, your retention goal for the immediate future is to be at that 85%. And when you have a goal, we know that people do better with goals. And so defining a goal, not just let's just get better. It's really about trying to set a concrete and specific goal for where you want to be. And you can do this by using your numbers. I think Megan already mentioned this with retention, with recruitment, but make ongoing adjustments. Adapt with what you need. Sorry, I'm just getting a note here, so bear with me. Okay. What's happening, the reason why sometimes Lynn and I are pausing is we're sending communications back and forth so that we can manage the time flow and everything. That's why I'm pausing. You want to be able to respond to participant needs and expectations. An example of this is that if somebody expects that when they come to your site, it's not going to be a hassle to find parking, and they're having trouble finding parking, that's a warning sign that there might be a problem for this person. And while it might seem a small thing for that person to have trouble finding parking, it's very important to them. And so you want to be able to think about ways to respond to their needs and expectations. If they expect a visit to take 15 minutes because that's what we told them in the information, and it's taking 25 minutes because there's backlogs in the clinic, that's a missed opportunity. That's a disappointing an expectation that was unmet, and that's a problem for participants, and that's a potential setup to have a retention problem. You want to think about developing your retention plan with multiple strategies, and then we'll go on with that as we start to think about it. But have a set of options, tools in your tool bag for ways to develop your retention and maintain your retention. Working on flexibility, I can't emphasize enough, flexibility is so important. Flexibility in everything from when you schedule visits, when you call people, how long they can be delayed in showing up. Is your program one that can take people that are half an hour late, or is everything really tight and so you're not able to take people if they don't show up just on time? The more you can have flexibility, the better off you're going to be. And then the last part is making sure that you have resources. And I think this is important. We put a lot of expectations on frontline research staff, to commit effort. But if you don't have the resources in terms of time, space, and staffing to be able to actually execute these plans, I think that's an important thing to discuss. And I don't want to dismiss that, because it's important that you guys are resourced sufficiently to be able to do the job that you're expected to do, because we can only work within our capacities. Any questions? Any comments about any of this?
And lines are open.
So she called the meeting.
This is Davina. Can you hear me?
Hi, Davina.
So some of the things that we really made sure to focus on for our folks is we know that transportation can be a big issue. We will often offer bus tokens and to help with those situations. Also, as part of getting out there and getting involved with the community, we've located agencies that will allow us to help our participants to set up a P.O. box for mail, or they can access email accounts through the library. More and more, we're able to contact people via those measures as well, mostly just saying, please give us a call. Obviously, we can't share any other information, but that's been one that's been good. One of the things I've really noticed that works well for the POTE site in Oregon is the recognition that they give to each individual, recognizing their birthday, recognizing, their successes that they've had. I know that it's really important to them when they complete their phase 2, they have a celebration. They'll bring in a pie or a cake or something and really make it a great thing for that client to know how important it was for them to be part of that study.
Thanks, Davina. I think that's a great example, and we are going to move on, Lynn, because I know we've got to watch the time. But, Davina, I'm so happy you mentioned birthday cards. I think we take birthday cards and acknowledgments of milestones in people's lives for granted, many of us, and it is unbelievable to watch what someone feels like when they get a birthday card from the study. And I've just been struck by that time and time again, how much people appreciate that recognition. And so it's just a really nice, simple example of how you can build that relationship, and it's a great way to incorporate that as part of your retention philosophy. Thanks, Davina. Sure. One other thing I'll just mention real quickly before we move on is all of what we're talking about has to be done in an ethical manner, consistent with good research practice, good clinical practice, and with the guidelines and standard operating procedures of your clinics, as well as with your IRB. So we're going to encourage you to be creative. We're going to encourage you to do all of this, but it's very important that you appreciate, we go back to those systems that we were talking about in recruitment, that you go back and make sure that everything you're doing is consistent and appropriate with what your program and IRB allow you to do. Lynn?
Sure. Let's see. Do I have control yet? Can you switch to the next slide?
I'll give you control, and then I'll switch to it, and then.
You're all set, Lynn.
Oh, there we go.
Thanks, Liz.
Where are we? Okay. Okay. So I think Jennifer has done a really good job of summing up the philosophy of retention. And so now we just want to talk about the real logistics of how do you build a retention plan. We've talked a lot about building rapport with the participants, make an environment where they want to come back and where it's easy for them to come back. That includes the flexibility of scheduling. Just because we all want to work 9 to 5 doesn't necessarily mean that people who have jobs will be able to come in at that time. Every so often, switch your hours up and say, oh, you need to come in at 6, I can do that for you. Also on the weekends if possible. That doesn't mean you always have to, but on those times that it's really difficult for the participant to come in, understand that it's difficult for them and be flexible. And in that same respect the person's time. Realize that if you tell them that you're going to be ready at such and such time, make sure you're there and make sure that you do the best you can to stay on time. And as Jennifer mentioned, tell them the truth about how long the follow-up visits are going to take and try to hold to that. There's nothing more frustrating than going and getting pushed off or saying, I'll be with you in 10 minutes, and then having your time be disrespected in that sense. The one thing that it's really important to have good contact information. We do the locator form with all the protocols, but every time the participant comes in and every time you talk with them on the phone or send them a note or something like that, make sure that you have accurate information with them. Make sure, so are you still living at so-and-so? Is this still the best phone number that I can reach you at? And make sure that they have resources to contact you as well. So if they do change phone numbers or homes, or if they need to change the appointment, that they can easily access you by having a card. Every time they come in, give them another one, so that way if they've lost the other ones, they know exactly how to get in touch with you. And we talked a little bit about making sure, and we'll talk more about this at the consenting thing, but make sure the participant understands the expectations. The expectations, we expect you to come in weekly for the next 6 months. We expect you to come in at 3 months, at 6 months. Don't minimize how often they need to come in and or how much time it's going to take, because that's really just going to be a disservice for everybody. I think I skipped ahead. Yes, one thing that's important is getting releases of information. So for parole officers, probation, doctor offices, other treatment agencies, maybe family members. So if you are having a difficult time finding somebody, you can call their parole officer and say, hey, look, I'm looking for so-and-so. So make sure that you have those in place so if you need to contact other people about the participant, you can do that. Review the study reports and the files that you have on the participant. If you can't find them, go back and read the progress notes and see if there was something going on with the participant that may lead you to know where they are at this time, or that, oh gosh, they mentioned that they were going on vacation at this time. Well, I forgot all about it. Those kind of things. And when you're developing the retention plan, think about, meet with your team often about what is the best approach and your agency, and keep revisiting that. This process isn't working. Talk with people about where the participants may be, and keep those lines of communication open. As Jennifer said, you have to be creative. But we have to think outside the box as far as keeping your mind open, but within the protocol and within good clinical practice guidelines and within IRB guidelines. So there is a lot of flexibility, but you do need to keep those three things in mind. And if you are concerned about whether or not something is acceptable, reach out to your RRTC, reach out to your superior, and figure out whether or not you can actually do that. And don't just assume it's not going to work. But go ahead, Jennifer.
Sorry, Lynn. I thought a good example of thinking outside the box but within the protocol is field visits and field interviewing. I think this is a hot topic because there are some institutions that permit people to go out into the field to actually knock on doors and see participants. And I know that's not necessarily something that we all do. But I think it's a good one to think about, because for some people they're able to do that and some they're not able to do that. And so you want to make sure that you understand the local constraints, but also don't limit yourself. Until you ask, you're not going to know whether or not you can do that. And so I just think it's an example of how some sites are able to go out and go that extra mile for retention, whereas some of us aren't able to do that.
Exactly. Yeah. And I know that we struggle a lot with especially in our population, people ending up in jail or prison. And there's a lot of federal regulations around whether or not we can reach people. So make sure that if you do find out the participants are in jail or in prison, that you do find out what the regulations are around your IRB and around your RTC as far as policies are concerned with that. One thing that when Jennifer and I were talking about this, one thing that she stressed was when things are not going bad. That does not mean that you should become complacent and that you should not continue to think outside the box and be creative, because just because things seem to be going smooth, it could change at any given moment. Jennifer, did you want to talk more about that?
Well, I guess my thinking on this is that a lot of times we only focus on something when it's not going well, and that sense of complacency. And I tend to be a sort of catastrophic thinker, so I'm always assuming everything's going to go wrong, and that's just my personality. But living inside my head. But I think it's also important, because when things are not going bad, that means that there's a lot going well, and we really want to focus on that. And what is it that's making us successful at recruitment? What can we share with other sites, and what do we need to do to maintain that success? I also think it's an opportunity for coordinators and PIs to really acknowledge and honor the hard work of their staff, because I have yet to be a participant in a study where retention goes well just on its own. I mean, more often than not, retention goes well because people are working really, really hard. And it's important for us all to acknowledge that and the hard work that everyone's doing. And that's, I think, what I mean. And it also means that, take that 1% dip or that 2% dip fairly seriously. Don't just think that that's stable. This is, again, going back to using your numbers. It's a time to evaluate. It may not always be the case that there's a problem, but if you've been steady at 65%, 65, 66, 67, 60, something like that, or hopefully up around the 80s, vacillating back and forth between 79% and 80% at any retention point, and you drop to 86, take a look at it and just bring it up in conversation. Have the the team try and see and evaluate whether or not there's anything there. Is that a signal of a problem that could be coming? And if it's not, that's fine. Just move on. But if it is, then you're able to do early intervention to try and address it. Sometimes where I notice dips when things are going really well is when there's staff turnover. When somebody new starts, not because the person who's new isn't able to do a successful job, but that's a real resource burden on a new team to start to be able to pick up. And participants feel uncomfortable when they meet new people. So it's a point when you really want to watch, particularly at sites where things are going really well, to make sure that this is a time that you've managed to anticipate there could be potential problems and that you're developing a plan to address it.
And the other thing is to use your colleagues amongst the CTN and within the protocol too, because a lot of the dialogue, and that's what we're hoping we can spend the next couple of minutes on, is what is happening at the different sites. Because you think that, oh, I'm doing this and everybody's doing this, but that may or may not be the truth. And so we want to open up those communication lines between protocols, between sites, within sites. So everybody is sharing their creativity. And so, because we will all do much better if we provide insight to each other and guidance to each other. So that leads to questions and comments, and if anybody has any other strategies that they're using, we would really, really appreciate feedback on this. If you have questions on retention and recruitment at your local sites.
Lynn, I had an exercise that I thought we could do, and we could try and use that whiteboard if Liz wants to hand over the control to me.
Are you going to make me draw a picture of myself?
No, Lynn is very good at drawing on the computer, I have to say, but we're going to deprive you of that right now. Okay, so I've got it. So let me just go to the whiteboard.
It's up there for you, Jen.
Oh, cool. Liz, you're like this person in the background doing everything. So what I was curious to do with this was is because I think a lot of times when we talk about retention, we do want to think about what are some of the challenges. So what are the retention challenges that people are currently facing? And since we have people with a lot of different backgrounds and experience, I think this would be a good time to maybe take a few minutes, if this is all right with you, Lynn, to try and define some of those retention challenges. So what are the struggles that people are having right now with retention, just as they threw them up? And so we need to open the phone lines.
Lines are open.
Okay. So when I think, I'm just going to put up there because it's one that I'm sure is common to everyone, are missed appointments. So what are some other challenges that people are dealing with right now? Let's just brainstorm a little bit.
Able to reach?
Oh, say that again? Can't reach the participant? Is that what someone said? Can't. Unfortunately, this is harder to hear than I'd anticipated. Can't reach participant. I'm not shy about picking on people, so I'm just going to look here. I see Marcia. Any retention challenges that you're dealing with?
Getting people to come to the actual treatment sessions, not just the research sessions.
Good point. Showing up for treatment.
And the other retention challenge, well, we've had 3 others, hospitalizations, phones being turned off, and jail.
That's 3 big challenges. Phones that don't work, being hospitalized, in jail. Oh, golly. I'm not going to edit that because I don't know how to do it. And jail. Okay, other challenges that people have?
Relapse. When a participant relapses, they often have shame about returning to treatment and thinking that was going to affect their participation in research.
Okay. Other things? Thank you for that. I don't know who that was. Whoops.
Davina.
Oh, thanks, Davina.
Hi, Jennifer. This is Scott.
Hi, Scott.
Change of addresses.
Okay.
And moves. And this one would be more related on the staff side if there's like a staffing change at the site.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned staffing issues because I think, it's important to look at the whole system. Staffing changes. Okay. Other things? How about Marcia? Any thoughts on this about challenges with retention?
I just gave you 4.
Oh, that was you, Marsha. I'm sorry. I'm running down. I apologize. Sarah or Megan? Or Udi? I hope I pronounced your name right. Okay, so these are a few. I mean, let's think. Lynn, do you have any others to add? I mean, I have ones like not enough time, not enough staff, too much data entry, so I can't make calls. You can see that I'm trying to throw in ones that aren't necessarily participant-based. Don't have a tracking system.
It's actually interesting, Jennifer, that you're doing it this way because it kind of shows that there is really the participant compliance side of that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then there's also the researcher side of that, and it gets back to what you talked about earlier about what you have control over and what you don't have control over.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really gets to the ones, you know, putting those ones in the category that you have control over. What can we do to change those things?
Mm-hmm.
We meaning the research team at large.
Yep. I still have a bunch more, so I mean, I don't have to put them all up. But there's also things like simple things. I'm not going to type this one. Phone line. The phone line from my program is blocked, and people don't answer blocked calls.
Yeah.
So, for example, we work at a psychiatric hospital, and the hospital, generally speaking, doesn't show up on caller ID. And what we're finding, particularly like a year ago or so, it was a real trend not to answer phones from blocked calls. And so we ended up getting, and we're moving into solutions now, we ended up getting a mobile phone and learning how you could unblock the call, because it wasn't necessarily they didn't want to talk to us. It was that they didn't know it was us. And there might be a lot of people that they don't want to talk to that also have blocked lines or phone lines that aren't identified. So that's an important approach too. So sometimes calling from different lines. So if we were to go through this same list and think about the ways, and we won't do this for all of them, but Lynn, I don't know if I want to hand this off to you. Why don't I hand this off to you? I think the next part of this is identifying the challenges and then also thinking about the strategies we can use to address them. So somebody mentioned phones turned off. And you know, what's your approach to dealing with phones turned off? Or how do people deal with the issue of a phone that's disconnected?
Well, I think the first inclination would be is to look in the locator form and see what the next phone number is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and to try to go down and use those resources that you have available that the participant has provided.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The other thing to keep in mind is that often our clients are using cell phones and they're pay-as-you-go, and it may just be that the phone's disconnected this week, but if you try again in a week or two, we have had where people have finally been able to get money to pay for that bill and had them reinstated. So not necessarily want to give up on a number.
That's a really good point.
I totally agree with that. I think it's really amazing to me that the phone call that I make in the morning to the disconnected phone by that afternoon sometimes is reconnected. Because people, when they have limited resources, are having to make very difficult decisions about managing their funds. And sometimes they do need to wait a day or a few, but people like to hold on to their numbers because they like to be connected. So usually they're able to get that line reconnected. So my approach to phones turned off is a two-pronged strategy. One is what Lynn has already mentioned. You absolutely have to check every time you see that person that nothing has changed. Just like when you go to the doctor, it drives me crazy because they ask me every time. I've lived at the same place for 7 years, and they're like, any change to your number? I'm like, no. And as much as I don't like that question because I just want to go see the doctor, I really understand why they're doing it, because it's the one time they don't ask might be the time that phone line's changed. So you need to ask every time, and if we're not doing that, that's a problem. So that's the first part. And then the second part is you don't give up. you don't want to look at a call log as a coordinator or as a lead node. I don't want to look at a log of calls to participants and see phone disconnected and then no other contacted efforts with that participant. One phone turn-off is a problem, but you want to keep trying the number because very often it comes on. The other approach is that's why you want to get those locator contacts and get permission to call other people, because if people give you permission to do that, it can be very successful in terms of reaching people or giving you a status update on the best way to reach that person. Other people might have other ideas, but how are we doing on time, Lynn? You wanted to go on to some other questions, so why don't we move? But I really do think this brainstorming is a classic psychology strategy. You want to list all of the challenges that you've got and start to unpack them and dismantle them. Don't evaluate what the problem is. You want to just list them all. And then you want to start thinking, well, what can we do about those specific things? I mean, the classic one is showing up for treatment. And if we had more time, I think this is a whole other conversation, is about how to address showing up for treatment. And there are ways to encourage, promote, and set up a set of strategies that permits you to start increasing your treatment rates. And it starts with looking at your numbers at the rates that you have, looking at where you want to be with retention in terms of treatment, and then starting to understand where with the system that you're working within you can start to look for those 1 or 2% improvements in retention. And that's the beginning of a trend that you can start to build. And we've done that at our sites a lot because retention and treatment is a big problem.
And Jennifer, can I just add something about the locator form?
Please.
I think that if you just say to a participant, have there been any changes, they almost automatically say no.
Like me at the doctor, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think you have to actually go through the locator form and remind them of who they wrote down originally to contact, and then ask if those numbers are still active or if there are other people that they would like to add at that time.
That is such a good point. I'm so glad I'm sorry, I don't recognize your voice.
This is Joanne.
Oh, hi, Joanne. Thank you so much for bringing that up. It's so important. And also, you just made me think you want to show them the number because they might have changed numbers and not even remembered that they hadn't changed the number depending on how long it's been since you last saw them.
Exactly.
Such a good point. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So that's great. Yeah, as Jennifer said, we could talk a lot about tracking systems and how to reach participants that are no longer at the information that they've given us, and how to use resources to track people. But I don't think that this is we don't have time to do that. But maybe MS can provide a different follow-up to this down the road, as well as showing up to treatment and so forth. Do other people have other things that they'd like to contribute today? Or any final thoughts?
Because if you don't, I think one of the things we'd like to hear is what, moving forward with recruitment and retention activities, what types of conversations, what types of training would be useful? I mean, are people looking more for information on tracking systems and how to use tracking systems? Are they more interested in understanding how to use your reports to help set goals and adjust strategies? Do we want to spend more time on hard-to-reach populations? I think it's really helpful, Liz, I don't mean to speak for you, but I think probably hearing back from people, gee, this was okay, but what I really wanted to hear was this, or now that I know this, I want to hear this, so that this information and the resources of training can be utilized in the way that meets the needs.
Jen, if I might add, I know I really appreciate the plug for getting some feedback for training needs. I am actually taking notes to the bar here on ideas for future training based on what you're mentioning right here.
Oh, good. So thoughts on that from anyone?
You could also feel free to email any of us, too, if you have thoughts, because it's really important, because we want to be able to provide the resources and the information that would be helpful to you guys.
So, Liz, I think we're we've covered our bits, so unless I don't see any questions in the queue online, and I'm not hearing any, so I think that perhaps we're completed.
All right. Thanks very much for Jen and Lynn. I really appreciate it. And everybody else, I'd like to thank you for joining this seminar today. What I'm going to do as a follow-up to this session is I'm going to send a follow-up email to everybody attaching an electronic registration form for some of the future training sessions that we have coming down the road. The next session we have coming up will be adverse and serious adverse events, held on July 8th. So what I'll do is I'll attach a registration form and an evaluation form. And again, I encourage everybody to complete the evaluation form and send it on in to us. And you can feel free to use that evaluation form as a means of providing us input on future training sessions. We really, truly appreciate it, and I do read every one of those forms and try to incorporate whatever recommendations I can possibly incorporate in the following session. Let's see, I mentioned the evaluation. Also, I got a recommendation from somebody to attach a larger version of the PowerPoint slides, and I will include that in the email. So with that said, I think we're all done. I'd like, again, thanks everybody for joining, and look forward to the follow-up email as it has some pretty good attachments with it. Lynn, thank you very much. Jen, thank you very much. Oh, you're very welcome.
Pleasure. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, this will conclude today's presentation. We do thank you for your participation, and you may disconnect at this time.